So hello and welcome to today's session. It's going to be on HFSP or Human Frontier Science Program Research Grants. We're very excited to be having this session. It's been something that we've been thinking about for a long time now. Um, so as you can see, we have a kind of diversity in the people whom you're going to be hearing from today. And the way we set up this webinar was that we wanted to be able to present a wide variety of perspectives to people who are interested or who are thinking of applying for HFSP um, research grants. So what you will hear from today during the webinar is you will hear from people from HFSP itself, Almut and Guntram. You will hear from someone who's been on a review committee, Gautam. You will hear from two awardees, Rashna and Satyajit, who will bring differing perspectives. One will tell you a bit about their journey as an awardee, and one will also tell you about what having an HFSP grant, the kind of broader implications of having an HFSP research grant means to both your career and to the life science community in India. And so a bit of an introduction, I'm Shantala Haridas from IndiaBioscience. I'll be your technical host for today. We're also joined on Zoom by Bhavna George, who's worked as a freelancer with us to put together this webinar. We have Shreya, who is going to be compiling all the questions that you will be sending in for our question and answer session. And Manjula will be doing the same thing on YouTube. Okay, so just to let you know as to what the program for today's webinar, I'm very briefly going to tell you a little bit about the International Grants Awareness Program, which is the umbrella under which we are conducting today's webinar. I won't take too much of your time with this. We will then move on to the topics that all of you have come here to learn about. So you will first hear from Guntram Bauer about HFSP. So he'll tell you a little bit about the HFSP organization. You'll then hear from Almut. She'll discuss research grants in specific. And then we will move on to hearing from Gautam. So Gautam has also served on a review committee, and so he'll tell you what he thinks makes for a successful HFSP proposal from that perspective. We'll then hear from Rashna, who'll tell us about an HFSP grant application from her point of view. And finally, we will hear from our last speaker for today, Satyajit or Jitu, who will tell us about what having an HFSP research grant can mean for you. Then we'll just take a very short break, just maybe a half a minute break when everyone gets ready for the question and answer session. And then we'll move into the question and answer session. And I've kept about 30 minutes aside for the question and answer session. So please do come forward with your questions throughout the webinar because we have a fair amount of time for that. As I said, I'm from IndiaBioscience, and I'm going to very briefly go over this because I think we might be running a little late. So the International Grants Awareness Program was kind of envisioned with the hope and the aim to improve the quality and quantity of applications going out from India to international funding opportunities. And so just to let you know that this was previously also referred to as the International Research Training and Mobility Grants Awareness Session. And as you can see, that's a bit of a mouthful even to say during a webinar. We then switched over to calling it the International Grants Awareness Program. And so if you're looking for resources, if you're thinking of applying for an international funding opportunity, do look under both of these titles in case if IndiaBioscience has already created a resource that would be relevant for you. Okay, so now as I said, we were trying to improve the quality and quantity of applications going out. So the way we wanted to do this was to kind of approach it from as many perspectives as possible, which is also happening in today's webinar. So we wanted to have prospective applicants here from the funding agency, reviewers, Indian awardees. And through this, what we wanted to do is we wanted to help them get an awareness about the international funding opportunities, get idea about the details that on as to how to create a successful application, what these funding schemes are looking for, and also help them interact with the Indian awardees so that they can boost their confidence. They can see someone that they know in a similar setup to them who's got the award. And so together we thought that all of these would kind of lead to more and higher quality applications going out from India. And so I've also put down grants managers. And so these are also a group of people that we hope will participate in our resources because we hope we don't just train applicants, but that we also train institutions in the process of applying for international grants. And so these resources have been created in a wide variety of ways. We have used webinars, as in today, we put out podcasts, we have informational articles, interviews, workshops, though right now these again will be kind of restricted to the webinar format. So we're really trying to make this package as comprehensive and diverse as possible. So this was a project that was launched recently. We launched it at the end of 2019. All our resources are freely available on our website, www.indiabioscience.org. And so just to briefly tell you, so far we have started working on 3 different funding opportunities. And so these resource materials for these are available. And so those are EMBO schemes, the Marie Curie fellowships, and right now the HFSP funding scheme. So this is what we already have. Do take a look on our website if any of these resource materials are relevant to you. And so with that, I will stop my part of the presentation, and I will now hand it over to Gundram. So Gundram Bauer is the Director of Science, Policy and Communications at HFSP, and he's going to tell you a little bit about HFSP. So over to you, Gundram.
Thank you, Pavana. Thank you, Shantala. It's a great pleasure to be here, and thanks for IndiaBioscience to invite us to do this. But also thank you to our Indian colleagues who were speakers on today's panel and who have helped us in the years past. And so I think it's a welcome opportunity for us to make our programs more known and help you eventually to structure your next or your first HFSP proposal. So if we go to our first slide. There we go. And just give you a 2-3 minutes introduction to HFSP before I hand over to my colleague Almut. HFSP is a voluntary international collaboration that was established just over 30 years ago and currently supported by these countries who provide us with an annual budget and who established our headquarters in Strasbourg in the northeastern corner of France. And we are currently looking at an annual budget of 56 to 57 million US dollars, which we use to provide funding for research collaborations in various ways. Next slide, please. And these members have given us a very clear and specific scientific mission, and that is to fund basic research at the cutting edge of what is currently being done in the life sciences, but leaving us a very broad spectrum that opens up investigations into all kinds of sophisticated and complex mechanisms that you can think of. There is no top-down priority or theme setting. It's all bottom-up. If you have good ideas, you can approach HFSP with these ideas. We do, however, place quite a strong emphasis on a couple of I words. As a globally operating funding organization, all of our awards or programs have an international, if not intercontinental component to it. We support interdisciplinary research that is in particular now relevant for what Almut is going to say, bringing scientists from different research areas and disciplines together. And then, of course, we look at the excellence, the scientific merit of a proposal in order to take a decision on funding, yes or no. Next slide, please. The research grants support international teams. Whoops. I'm missing the slides now. There we go. A few days, we have another webinar scheduled for the fellowships, which you saw in Shantala's introductory slide. Our programs are open to scientists from all countries. We've handed out grants to scientists from 49 countries, including 69 nationalities, and also the postdoctoral fellowship are even more diverse. And since our beginning, we have had 28 scientists who, after being funded by HFSP, have gone on to win a Nobel Prize. And I think this speaks to the quality and the excellence of the science we'd like to support. Next slide, please. Which I'm now happy to hand over to my colleague Almut for talking you through the Research Grants Program. Thank you.
Thank you, Guntram. So now we will move on to Almut, and Almut is going to talk about the specifics of HFSP research grants. She is also the director of research grants at HFSP, so she is one of the best persons that can kind of share these insights with us. So over to you, Almut.
Welcome, everybody. Very nice to have the opportunity to spread the word of in more details of what it means to write a grant proposal for HFSP. I have, before I've just joined this year HFSP, been a scientist myself, and I've had a research grant, so I'm really happy to share this with you. So we have two types of grants: the early career grants, which are meant for researchers that have obtained their PhD less than 10 years ago, and they can't have had an own lab for more than 5 years. So most of you seem to be in that category. And if you want to join with some more senior scientists, that's not a problem. You can apply for so-called program grant, which has the same setup. So you have to have a team of 2 to 4 scientists. You have to be international and interdisciplinary. I'll say more about that later. And your team members can be at any career stage. Next. We'll have, can you take the next? Sorry. We'll have the objectives to stimulate new and daring ideas and to provoke people to really think in new ways about science. You don't need any preliminary results, but we encourage you to invite colleagues from outside the life sciences to bring new methods and new understanding and new ways of thinking to your research questions. The whole idea is to develop new lines of research through new interdisciplinary collaborations with colleagues who haven't been working together before, and bringing together ideas in a way that the sum of it, or that the result is more than the sum of the parts. Can I have the next? It's very important that we are funding basic life science research. We're getting many applications from other areas, and it's always sad because they get sorted out very early in the process. So really, from the molecular to the cellular to more complex levels of biological systems, what we want to fund is research that asks questions regarding the fundamental principles of life. It's investigator-driven, as Guntram said. We've got no specific areas prioritized. We don't fund more virus research this year than in any other year. And as you may think, no, it is very competitive. We really, in very few words, would say it's international, interdisciplinary, new teams doing new, fundamental, often risky research. Next. What we don't support is routine work that may be important, but not intellectually challenging, not asking really new questions. We do not fund applied and translational works. So no work for a new treatment against an important disease. It's important research, but not HFSP. No work for diagnostics, therapy, no pure technology or engineering. Engineering can be part of a project to answer life science questions, but not just pure engineering. And no agriculture, veterinary, or any other more environmental applied research. We don't fund projects that are just collecting huge sets of data either. We really need to have a fundamental biological question asked. Next. So it's 3 years grants, which usually people spend the money in more than 3 years. They can extend the time they use the money to 4 years. And it's $250,000 for if it's a team of 2, and then it's 100,000 more for each new team member, but really no more than $450,000, and teams of more than 4 are strongly discouraged. If more than one in the member in a team is in the same country, there will be less money. So this is something that is not necessarily a good team construction as seen from HFSP perspective. And as we said, the funding rate is really low. It's about 4% of the original letters of intent that are funded. But a letter of intent is short, so it's always worth to try. Next. Yes, so as we said, it's a 2-stage process. So the first is a letter of intent, where the submission deadline is in March, and we'll get 700 to 900 applications. And then we sort out those that are not in the scope, like all the applied work. And then there's an initial review by the review committee, and then a discussion of the most promising applications by another smaller selection committee, which ends in 80 to 90 invitations to submit a full application by July. Then the deadline is in mid-September for the full applications if you've been invited, and those will be reviewed by external reviewers that we ask to review for us, and by the review committee. And there's a meeting of the review committee in January, and the result is announced in late March. If you want to know who is in the review committee, you can find them on our homepage. Next. So how to write an application to make it successful? The first and maybe most important rule is start early. So this is a good time to start because the deadline is in March, and the first thing you have to do is find a good team. As a PI, you have to be in HFSP member country, which you are, but you can also participate in a team with others. The team has to be international. It has to be interdisciplinary, and we strongly encourage you to have someone in the team who is covering the more physical, mathematical, or chemical components of a question, or a modeling theoretical part of the project. And we do not support teams that have been collaborating and publishing together before. They will leave the competition very early, so that is not helpful. Next. Good things to do is really find team members that bring completely new approaches to the question, new questions and new ways to look at the problem. It has to be at the absolute front of your field. Don't be shy, take risks if you have an idea how to tackle it. 2 to 3 is good for young career or early career researchers, no more than 4. Next. What you don't want to do is to apply with a project that would be the next logical step in your or another team member's lab. The reviewers will see that immediately. We really want you to think of a new project which is challenging for your lab. You can't, usually those next logical step applications, send them to a national research funding agency, not to HFSP. Don't ask existing or former collaborators, and specifically not your former supervisors. Don't have more than one member in a country. That's the best recipe, but definitely it has to be international, and definitely not more than one member from the same institution. That's a no-go mostly. And don't add any team member just because it's a famous person. It needs to be clear that every team member has an important role in the project. Next. So again, if you want to write a letter of intent, start thinking and discussing and putting together a team now. And think about the review committee members are reading 50 to 60 such letters of intent. You really want to convince them with your letter of intent. So you have to use a language that they understand, because the reviewers are generalists and read a broad range of applications. So anybody who is a scientist in your broader field has to find your question exciting. Ask someone from outside to read it and see whether they find it exciting or difficult to read. And don't tell us it's interdisciplinary. That's the condition. Just tell us which way it is interdisciplinary and innovative. Next. So if you made it to the full application because you've convinced the committees, then it's really important to see that your application is not just ongoing research in one of the labs. It becomes obvious, if not from the letter of intent, then at this stage. Don't go over too complicated things that you're not going to do. Just tell us what you plan to do, and if it's risky, tell us what you will do to tackle the risk if it doesn't work. Don't miss important papers. The reviewers know them. Just don't propose something that's been done a year ago somewhere else. They'll find it out. And really think about which reviewers you list. You're allowed to list 6 reviewers. Some of the reviewers that we'll invite will be those that you have suggested, but we'll also suggest additional reviewers. So, last slide. I wish you really good luck, and you can always send questions to the grant@hfsp.org email. We are very happy to answer your questions if you are wondering about anything, and then read up on the webpage. It has a lot of important information. All the best.
Thank you, Helmut. Thank you for that presentation. It was, I think it'll be very, very useful for people who are planning to apply for an HFSP grant, the details that you went into. So I'm just going to change the screen sharing. So I just want to mention that we had some problems getting on YouTube. So all of our YouTube audience has joined us here. So welcome to everybody. And now we'll move over to Gautam Menon. He's a professor at Ashoka University and Institute of Mathematical Sciences at Chennai. So today he's going to be kind of like coming from the perspective of someone who's been on a review committee member, and he's going to tell you from that point of view what makes a successful proposal. And I think another unique insight that he can add to this perspective of being a review committee member is being someone who's so familiar with the scientific landscape in India. So I think he's going to bring these two perspectives together in his presentation. So over to you, Gautam.
Thank you, Shantana. And welcome to Guntram and Almut, who sort of virtually here in India actually from a long way away. So I had a bunch of points about how I see HFSP proposals and how the committee usually sees HFSP proposals. The first is, as a reviewer, it's always great fun to read HFSP proposals. And that's for multiple reasons, but mainly because these tend to be fairly daring ideas. And they're chosen because these are ideas that are not fundable elsewhere. Usually national level selection committees for proposals tend to be kind of standard in the way they think. It's very hard to persuade them to think of things that are really out of the ordinary, very unusual, very daring, very different. But that's where HFSP scores about pretty much any other type of funding agency, because they look for things that are not fundable elsewhere. And that's really the strength of HFSP. it enforces interdisciplinarity by the very structure of the application. You have to have an interdisciplinary application, otherwise it will just be thrown out right in the beginning. So when the application itself is constructed and all the instructions that you must follow to formulate the application, you must take care of the fact that it's not just a bunch of biologists getting together to submit a proposal, but you must have components in it that don't belong purely to the biological sciences, but are taken from other fields, from mathematics, from physics, from engineering, from optics. All of these things come together to really define a clean, nice, interdisciplinary area which you concentrate on in your proposal. As was stressed earlier, and I think it needs to be stressed again, this is unusual in the sense that there is no requirement for preliminary data. Most other granting organizations will require that you have some preliminary data to support your proposal, but HFSP doesn't ask for that. It just requires that your idea should be daring enough. And it can be, of course, it's evaluated at multiple stages, including experts who are experts in your particular field, in the field of the proposal that you're putting forward. So the fact that it doesn't have preliminary data allows you a lot more flexibility, a lot more space to do something novel and unusual. The forms are very well designed, both the preliminary form as well as the full form, certainly from the point of view of a reviewer. It summarizes exactly the information that a referee needs in order to understand the proposal. And it's also the very tight constraints on size, length, and format are also very good for people who are writing the proposals, because then they really have to filter down their prose, forget all of the sort of highfalutin language, but really concentrate on the ideas, getting them across, and putting the combination of simple language that's required to convince a referee who's not necessarily in your area, together with the deep ideas that will convince the experts. This is something unusual and novel. Of course, as someone who sat on this committee for a few years, it's obvious that there are not enough proposals from India, and that's always been a bit saddening to me. And I do hope that this initiative by IndiaBioscience will lead to more proposals. In fact, from many of you who are interested in this, who've logged on to listen to this particular session, that you will think of HFSP as an alternative, as the place where you can put all of the ideas that you had ever since graduate school, really the stuff that keeps you awake at night. That's not necessarily not your day job, what you do, but the really beautiful ideas that would make a difference to the way we think about science. Next slide, please. So what should you pay attention to when you write your proposal? So Almut has covered some of this, but certainly the most important one is, are you sticking to the HFSP in quotes rules? There are very definite rules about HFSP regarding how you construct it, how international it has to be. You should not have multiple PIs on the proposal from the same institution, not even really from the same country, ideally. And do you sort of are you looking at the necessary intercontinentality of the proposal? Is it new and novel? All of these come into the fact of the HFSP rules, which are fairly clearly prescribed. Then there's a question of the idea itself. Is it an HFSP idea, novel in a very special way? That's not the sort of thing that a standard national funding agency looks at. Is it unique, or is it part of 20 ideas that everyone is talking about at the same time? And certainly there are peaks and troughs when one looks at proposals. There's a peak during stem cell research times. There's a CRISPR-Cas9 peak. All of these, in a sense, form a sort of background of what the community is thinking of at that point. But you should take care that your idea isn't just one of a large number of ideas, all of which sound fairly similar, because then again, the committee will see through that. Is it interdisciplinary? Very important. So that's the first thing to think about when you decide how to construct your team and how to construct your proposal. Make sure that you have the right mix of people from different areas contributing to a single goal. Is your group balanced? Again, very important. HFSP prefers or likes proposals that are well balanced from the point of view of gender, of location, groups, proposals that are very, very Europe-centric, which have, countries, 4 neighboring countries in Europe, will not be looked upon with necessary favor. So what you want to do is to make your proposal such that it's representative of the broader landscape of people who do science, who do the biological sciences, who work in interdisciplinary areas of relevance to that particular proposal, which is why balance is also crucial in the way you decide who you want as part of the proposal. Does it make sense as an organic whole? And that's a sort of interesting concept, that finally there is an idea and there are people charged with implementing that idea who say that we want to take it forward. But are you putting people in at random who their relevance to the field that you're studying is not particularly clear? Is it in a sense an organic structure that everyone can understand, just looking at it from the outside, that yes, I understand where so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so fit in? The last point, again, is something that Almut referred to. Is there a national agency that could fund it? If the committee gets an idea that, look, this is something that this is a nice proposal, looks very good, but a national agency could easily fund it because it falls within their purview. That's, again, very important. You should not be submitting those ideas to HFSP. Next, please. Other things that the committee will look at is, have you and your collaborators on the proposal, the other PIs, have you done stuff that is similar earlier? And of course, you're required to list now points where you have jointly collaborated on something or worked on something together, so the committee will know. So you have to make a point that although we have collaborated, that was on something completely different. This proposal is new and novel, and it's really areas that we haven't thought about earlier. The committee is very interested in finding out, is it the same thing that you were doing ever since you became a PI? Is it really more of the same thing, just sort of dressed up a little bit and put lipstick on it to make it sound as though it's novel? And committees can see through this fairly quickly, especially with some experience, that look, there is really nothing new here. This is the same thing that X or Y has been doing ever since they graduated. This is something that we should not fund. Is there a story to the project? And this is something that I personally look out for. Where did you meet your collaborators? Over what sort of discussions did you decide it would be a good idea to get together? It's not central to the project in the way it's evaluated, but it certainly makes a project stick in a referee's head to know that there's an interesting story behind how you all got together. How did you identify the area to investigate? And what difference will you make to that area? We said that it shouldn't be something that you're doing right now, although your expertise should be relevant to that area. So how did you think about it? Why did you think that that was important? And what difference does your research plan make, does it plan to make to that particular area? And finally, what is the competence that you and your team will bring to the table? What is it that you can do that 25 groups around the country, around the world, in fact, cannot do? What are the special things that you can do, apart from having had the idea in the first place? Is there anything new or novel that you can do, in a sense, faster or better than anyone else? That's again a question of interest. Slide, please. Again, very important. And Albert mentioned that you had to involve people from outside the purely biological sciences. And typically it's a physicist, a computer scientist, an engineer, a social scientist sometimes, etc. Have you added these people just to make up the numbers? And this is something that the committee will see through immediately, because it will see that, look, this person's contributions are not well balanced in an organic sense with the rest of the proposal. So you must make sure that you're very serious about people outside your field, that you're including them because you feel and you understand that they can bring something very different to your own understanding. Maybe it's something that's quantitative as opposed to a qualitative understanding. Maybe it's just a very highly improved imaging system that someone who's an imaging expert, but not from the biological sciences, from an engineering science, can bring to this particular idea. Maybe it's the involvement of a social scientist who has thought of larger scale ecological issues in this area before. But you must, whatever you do, it's fine to select whoever you want to with the constraints of internationality, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But make sure that they are relevant. Next point, again, something that a committee looks for is the geographical component. Have you added people from China, for example, or from Japan, just to make sure that you satisfy the geographical component? Are they contributing? Are they essential? Where did you find out about them? What is it that they do that would be special in the context of their project? Are you going to collaborate, or are they going to be doing something? Are you going to be doing something? And finally, everybody's name will appear on the same paper. Is there going to be a genuine interaction, a meeting, an exchange of students, an exchange of ideas, a regular schedule on which you people will discuss all of this, a meeting that you will all plan to go together to? All of these are very important. Finally, feasibility. If all of us can have great ideas, but the question is, and that a reviewer will always look out for, is any part of this feasible? It could be a Nobel Prize winning idea if it actually worked, but maybe it won't work. And the people who will look at your proposal are in a good position to decide that, look, nice, maybe it might have worked, but certainly there's no technology in place to make it work for the next 10 years at least. If you get reviews back and sort of proposals that make it to the final stage do have a set of reports that are associated with them that are sent back, where it highlights what the committee felt if they wanted to turn down the proposal. Pay careful attention to them, because that is a little hint to how someone from outside, a person, both people who are technically skilled as well as people who are broadly in that area or able to have a general view of what's happening in that area, what they might think about your proposal. So read them carefully, and then if you resubmit, make sure that you address those points that are in there. So finally, all I wanted to say was that I think Jitu and will make this point, of course, and so will Rashna, that the HFSP grant is a very special grant. It's unusual in many ways. It is very explicitly international. It's very explicitly intended to be interdisciplinary. And it's a fairly large sum of money, certainly by Indian standards, to be able to use. And it comes with relatively few strings attached compared to Indian grants. So there are many reasons why all of you should consider applying for HFSP. If this may be your key to really identifying and working on and finding collaborators for that idea that you've been thinking about for the last 10 years and really wanted to do, but never was really able to. So this might be the time. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Gautam. So now we'll move on to hearing from Rashna, but before we actually get before I hand it over to Rashna, I'd like to once again mention to all of you that you can put in your questions in the Q&A box any point during the webinar. We are compiling them and we will then address them, share them with the speakers during the Q&A session. And so as you've heard from the presentations and as you will hear from the presentations moving forward, we're really lucky to have such a group of experts with us covering different perspectives. So I encourage all of you to make the most of that and share your questions. So now we will move on to hearing from Rashna. So she's the head of the Laboratory of Cell Signaling at CDFD in Hyderabad. She is going to be sharing her perspective as an HFSP awardee, and she's going to be talking about her personal process of applying to the HFSP grant. So over to you, Rashna.
Thank you, Shantala. So what I want to do today is to share with you the process of us writing that grant, a successful grant application to HFSP, and the whole process we went through and what it meant from my perspective then and what it means now. Just thinking one phrase to describe this HFSP grant is that everything one conventionally thinks about how one goes about writing a successful grant application kind of needs to be turned on its head when one puts this application together. Well, the first thing to do is, of course, go to the HFSP website and, download everything, read through the requirements for a grant, which is what we did. And the 3 I's stand out, it needs to be innovative, it needs to be interdisciplinary and international. Now, step 1 is actually the 3rd I, international. And Almut told you to, start thinking about it now, because you really need to be thinking about it not now, but all the time. And for me, the internationality was not addressed by saying, okay, I want to write an HFSP grant today. It was addressed by the way I do my science and I like to talk about it. So networking, going to international meetings, talking to people is something that is an integral part of the way I do like to do my science altogether. It doesn't have to be, okay, I want an HFSP grant, let's start thinking international. At an international conference, which now actually has come to our desktop, you should make an appointment for one-on-one discussions. And again, turning convention on its head here is don't be scared to share unpublished work. The fear of being scooped should not hold you back in making the most of these international meetings. Share your unpublished work to establish mutual trust. Be a good listener. Don't just go give a lecture and then come back. Have conversations with people you don't know. And these conversations are amongst equals. You need to be upfront, you need to be honest, and meet new people. And that's actually step 1 in ticking off the first box of internationality or intercontinentality in our case, at least. If I can have the next slide, Shantala. So in our case, it was Henning Jessen and myself, and we met at a conference on inositol polyphosphates, because that's what I've been studying for about 10 plus years in our lab. We focused on the inositol pyrophosphate shown here to the left of your screen, which is a cyclic inositol ring decorated with phosphates around it. I'm a cell biologist, a biochemist, studying inositol phosphate biology for the most part. And Henning Jessen is a synthetic chemist who was figuring out how to make inositol phosphates. And we met at an inositol phosphate meeting, and then he wrote to me a few months later saying, would you like to write this HFSP grant together? Henning had separately also been meeting Paul Wender, who, as you can see, is a chemist. He's quite senior, so obviously this was a program grant, not an early career grant. And Paul has been working for many years on delivery of drug and polyanions into cells. So the 3 of us got together to work on polyphosphate, which makes sense for all of us because Henning was interested in synthesizing polyphosphate. I want to understand polyphosphate biology, how it's made, what it does, and Paul wants to be able to deliver polyphosphate into cells. As you can see, this is something that neither of us were doing at the time, although we had one paper on the crosstalk between the importance of polyphosphate and inositol pyrophosphates. So that was what we had done previously and published in the field. But the other two had no work in this area, but were doing things that sort of fed into this. So our interdisciplinarity was born out of our networking. We found each other, and we realized that this is a problem that needs this interdisciplinarity. Shantala, yeah, can I have the next slide? So the third I is the innovation. And we realized that the study of inorganic polyphosphate is something that is novel, it's cool, it's daring, surprisingly understudied. It's the simplest biomolecule and the most understudied biomolecule. I had known about polyphosphate for many years, had dabbled in it for a bit, and this, it sort of, I can relate to what Gautam was just saying. It's something I wanted to do for about 15 years and just somehow had never thought that I could put together a grant application that could be funded to think about polyphosphate. So it wasn't something that we weren't exactly doing, but given our expertise, the fact that we, at least Henning and I had run independent labs for 10 plus years, we were confident in being able to conduct this research that we proposed. So, much like this fish trying to jump out of the bowl, you can see the cartoon to the top right of your screen. We knew how to swim, but we just didn't want to swim in a crowded bowl. The bowl we jumped into was not very far from where we were, but it's something we knew we'd be able to do. We know we can take that leap and we can swim in that bowl. So we had expertise and published work showing that we knew what we were doing, and the methodology we proposed to employ, we had proof that we would be able to do it in terms of our publication and the confidence that we'd be able to do it. So if I can have the next slide. So the next step, of course, is the letter of intent. Now, that's all there is to it. I fuzzed it out. It's on the left side of your screen, but that's the entire length of a less than 2-page letter of intent. All it needs is a summary, the development of the sub-projects, a few lines on how it's innovative, and what are the collaborative elements here. And from the time that Henning wrote to the two of us, it took about 6 weeks for us to bounce our ideas back and forth and develop that letter of intent. And as Almut already mentioned, about 10% of these letters of intent are invited for a full application. So we did that brainstorming for a period of 6 weeks, wrote something very short, very concise, and this is again very, very different from my experience in writing other equally well-funded grant applications. So if I can have the next slide. Yeah, so that's a comparison of the full application of an HFSP grant. On Shantala's screen, my notes have jumped up and down, so I will not worry about it too much. Shantala, if I can have the rest of the animation here, we'll do the comparison right away. Yeah. So I compared an HFSP grant application, ours, to another successful application to say SERB or DBT that many of us in India write, and those are our bread and butter grants, right? I realized that both these applications were the exact same length. They both required us to have an overview of the literature, overview of the proposed research. The HFSP element, which is just a half-page element that is novel, is how is it different from the ongoing research, which is important to highlight. And then, the body of the proposal was about 8 pages in both cases, for the SERB grant as well as the HFSP grant. There's the background, there's the outline of the grant, the necessity for international collaboration needs to be established, the research projects need to be developed in a good amount of detail, and here's the challenge that how do you convince somebody you know what you're doing without occupying too much space. So just filling volumes is not what's going to work. And again, potential problems and alternative strategies. But as was already highlighted, the table to the lower left of the screen will show you that we don't need prior publications. You don't need preliminary data, which you do need for a successful application to say SERB or DBT, especially if you're already a mid-career investigator. And the expected outcome that you always have to project as a patent or a publication or future research is not necessary for an HFSP application. Those are going to come out of it anyway. They, the committee doesn't need to be told in so many lines what the expected outcome is. And the money, of course, I've done a comparison for you in lakh rupees, about 50 to 70 lakhs for 3 years for a DBT or a SERB grant that is funded, and 2.5 crores per lab in Indian rupees, if for a 3-way grant is what we got, for a period of 3 years, which Almut says most of us end up using for about 4 years, which was enough to fund my lab completely for a period of 4 years. And we have a mid-sized lab of about 10 students and postdocs. So I'll take the next slide, and that's my last. Last but one. So again, here the timeline from the successful prelim, being told that our preliminary application was successful to being able to finally submit that full application for us was about 6 weeks of brainstorming. And you can see how very closely we collaborated, literally line by line. You'll be able to see here, this is just a screenshot from the Word file that we were sharing. Literally every line, the 3 of us went back and forth on. And we were amongst the 40% of successful applications, with a good amount of critical review from the committee and the referees, which we really, have followed as we've been conducting the grant. Of course, that was a very celebratory moment, as I've highlighted here with that little cartoon. And the last slide then, Shantala, I want to sort of tell you what the intangible benefits have been for us beyond having a really good amount of grant money that we can do a lot of flexible research with. You can spend it on manpower, you can spend it on equipment, consumables. You can't spend it on furniture, but your institute needs to give you the lab furniture, but you can spend it very freely. But beyond the money, it's allowed us to establish this exciting new collaboration that wasn't ongoing, right? Yet that collaboration continues. Henning and I, for instance, have now submitted a joint Indo-German grant proposal. You can't renew your HFSP grant, but you can continue to do other things as you collaborate. Most importantly, this innovation-dependent successful grant application has reshaped the way we think in our lab. We are not just going to pick the low-hanging fruit. We're not just doing the easy experiment, right? We really always wanted to be able to do the really cool, tough work and ask really daring questions, but having a successful grant application that has just proposed that has emboldened us to be able to do this without worrying about whether it will fly or not. And thirdly, and most importantly, having an HFSP grant means you're part of this network of HFSP awardees. You can go for the annual HFSP awardees meeting, where you meet people from different backgrounds. It's very different from a conventional scientific conference where everyone is doing the same thing. So the inositol polyphosphate meeting is where I met Henning, but going to the HFSP awardees meeting means we can meet so many different people, everyone doing something esoteric or blue sky, which is oftentimes a bad word, but not at an HFSP meeting. And as I said, it's always better to have multiple people thinking about one problem. And for me, that has been the most attractive benefit out of this HFSP grant. So that's my presentation, Shantala. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rashna. I think this is very useful for everybody, and especially for those of you who said you didn't know someone in your institute or in your scientific circle who's got an HFSP grant. So Rashna really wonderfully broke down the process of getting there for their application. So now we will move on to hearing from Satyajit Meher, who is the Center Director at NCBS and has also had a long history of associating with HFSP, being an awardee too. So Rashna touched upon this a bit as to what having an HFSP research grant meant for her career. So I think Jeetu will present a bit more of a global perspective from the perspective of an institution head, what having an HFSP research grant can mean for your career trajectory, as well as, since this is such a unique grant, what it could mean for the broader scientific community. So over to you, Jeetu.
Thanks, Shantala. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. I'm got a little unstable connection, so I'm going to keep my video off, if that's okay.
Perfect.
Yeah. All right. Great. So, I mean, there were some, extreme, interesting and useful presentations from the previous speakers, from Guntram to Alma to Gautam and Rashna. So I don't need to belabor the point about the uniqueness of the HFSP granting scheme. I just want to give a somewhat of a small personal anecdote about the HFSP grants. Of course, as you know, the HFSP grants themselves are for the young. There's the early career, and for the less young as well. And many a time in the trajectory of sort of getting these grants, I'll add one more fact. It is useful, if you ask me, for thinking about grants, have, especially if you're a program grant, to have people at different stages of their career, because they bring different kinds of interest and experience, and also different perspectives to how these grants can be carried out. So I say that specifically because when I first had an HFSP grant now 25 years ago, I was just about to embark on establishing a laboratory for myself in India when a couple of colleagues, one who I had met at many international meetings, when I was a postdoc in New York, they contacted me and said, look, we know you're going to set up a lab in India, and we know what you're interested in. Would it be nice if we could do something together so that we keep our connections and association going, especially from an intellectual perspective? And to be honest, I wasn't, first of all, even clear what HFSP was about, and didn't even know whether this was going to be a good thing. But, 10 years to date, and after having actually received more than one of these awards because of various collaborations I've established, this award really was extremely crucial and central in the way I began to think about my own work, because it immediately made the perspective that Prashna raised about bringing the value of how multiple heads thinking about a similar problem or a question could add huge value to something that for one person would be perhaps not even a reasonable question to ask. And I think that for me, that really, in some sense, is charted out the trajectory of science that I still continue to follow. And I mean, not just in the context of HFSP, but in the context of just the everyday research that I do. I certainly, bring that, that embodiment of collaboration as a core to the science that I do. And I must say, I'm a a chemist by training, a cell biologist by passion, and somebody who works at the interface of physics, chemistry, and biology. So, I liberally collaborate with people in different disciplines, including engineers, having had a small training in engineering myself. But the HFSP allows you to have that team with the experts in different domains together. Okay, so having said that, I should say that and again, Gautam mentioned it, but I'm going to emphasize this, that India has been a member of the HFSP for a while now, and has seen very few proposals. And I think this is something that in some ways reflects, if you will, an insular attitude to doing one's own science. And I think it's important that we change that to do science that is functioning and working and opening up to international perspectives, especially if you want to solve problems in your own neighborhood. Because if solve problems in your own neighborhood are best solved if you bring multiple heads together. And those heads need not be your next door neighbor, but they can be and should be. Most likely you will find solutions if you are looking across continents with people who actually do have the experience and expertise to help you solve those problems. So I think the HFSP is the perfect example of a grant that would allow to resolve questions that you have that come out from your own circumstances and be resolved by these collaborations. It is it's actually interesting. Well, I'll first take the point of view of the individual and then go to the institute, as Shantala mentioned. From the perspective of the individual who gets a grant, I think it's really extremely rewarding, and you've already heard some of those rewards from Rashna. I mean, not just the money, but the scope of being able to bring multiple people together on the same platform in solving a problem that you really wished you could do for a very long time. Not only that, the individual is actually recognized today for having received an HFSP grant. It's almost like a badge of honor today to have an HFSP grant because the value of basic fundamental research and blue sky research, is enormous. And I mean, I must say the circumstances in many countries is going against that right now, where science is becoming more and more instrumental. But I think that, if we are true scientists at heart, do value basic blue sky researchers. And when you're being evaluated for promotions or for awards or for whatever, if those things are important to you, having an HFSP grant is, I must say, a huge plus. And I can say this from being on the other side of the fence, evaluating people who have moved up in various aspects of their career, as well as in having received awards, having been on juries for awards, where the discussion the immediate realization that somebody has an HFSP grant, brings interest towards that person's application, if you will. So, but the other huge advantage of having engaged in an HFSP type grant, I mean, whether it's successful or not, and I think more importantly, even if it is not, which is the reason why many of you should apply, is that you build collaborations. You build collaborations that are going to last you because ideas glue you together. And it is precisely that. That is what HFSP and this whole idea of having a human frontier science program was intended for, which is to bring people who think differently together. And even just simply the act of writing a grant. I have written many HFSP grants that haven't been successful, but I still collaborate today with many of the people who have written those grants because we really wanted to address those questions. And we found a common forum. And of course, we found ways and means of getting the things funded as well. But even if they were not funded, we continue to do together. And of course, if you get the grant, it really makes a big difference. But I think that's really an extremely useful thing. Now, from the perspective of the institution, of course, if you have individuals who have HFSP grants, they bring immediately a large spectrum of international members to the HFSP, international members immediately to your institution. And that opens up discussions with not just with yourself, but with many others, because the HFSP grant allows you to hold small meetings with your international collaborators and really let them loose on your colleagues in your own institution. So in some ways, you're running a small international laboratory, if you will, in 3 different parts of the world, or 4 or 2. And those benefits also come back to not only your own laboratory and your own laboratory members, but also to your institution. So, we are very fortunate at the NCBS to have one HFSP grant or two at over the past several years. And as the center director, I can attest that whenever anybody gets a grant like this, we celebrate it, because we think it's really not only a recognition of the individual, but also a wonderful opportunity for us as an institution to have access to the interesting, esoteric, if you will, interactions that our colleagues bring. So, so all I can say is that from the Indian institutional perspective, and also from the perspective of Indian scientists, please go out and write these grants. They're great fun. And of course, one has to, put your best foot forward and see what happens. With that, let me close up. And I'm sure there are so many questions when I'm sure the panel will be available for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Jitu. That was a lovely way to end the presentations for the first part of the webinar. We're going to move on to the audience, to the question and answer part of the webinar. With this, I'm going to stop sharing the slides and I invite all the speakers. Okay, perfect. Everyone already has their videos. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read out the question and I'm going to indicate which of you could address it. But of course, it's open to everyone. So please, I invite all of you to come forward if you would like to answer the question. Okay, so one of the questions that's come in from Swadhin is, how can one show that an idea is feasible, an excellent idea is feasible without preliminary data? So maybe Gautam or Almut, would you like to give this a go?
I think the committee is sort of, especially the external reviewers who look at it, are fairly experienced in knowing what's feasible and what's not. And so if you sort of describe your way in which you plan to do it, to structure your experiments, I think they'll be able to figure out whether there is currently the technology is in place, the understanding is in place to do it. It's a risk. I mean, in a sense, what you may consider feasible may not be what someone else in the field might think is possible within a 3-year period. Mm-hmm. But that's a risk you have to take, and it depends on your level of confidence. Yes, that's my best answer.
Yes, I would agree. I think feasible, it doesn't have to be, you don't need preliminary data, but you need to have a way to explain what you do if something doesn't work. And if you plan a project and the very first step is highly risky and you have nothing to do if that doesn't work, that won't be a good application. Well, if you have a large risk component, but a parallel plan to do something else, if that one risky thing doesn't work, that's much better.
Thank you. Perfect. So now another question that's come in, and this is about applying. So Nitin Mohan asks, is there a restriction on the number of times one can apply? What are the conditions if one is applied to apply? What are the conditions that exist if one is allowed to apply more than once? Almut?
Yeah, you can apply as many times as you wish. There are no restrictions, no conditions. But if you apply with the same or a very similar project and you have not even made it to the full application stage, or you get a note that you've had a lot of criticism, the reviewers remember your last year's application and they will see whether you have solved any of the problems they have identified. So you can try, and you can also try with new applications, with completely new teams and completely new questions as many times as you wish.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to add to that? I think Jitu also alluded that he has been a part of multiple different HFSP awards. So it is possible to kind of support yourself through various stages in your career via HFSP funding schemes. Okay, so another question that comes in, this is coming from an anonymous attendee. Does the proposal need to complete a story within 3 years of the grant, or can it just be a step in that direction? Will the reviewers understand or consider such a thing, like if it's just a step in that direction but not completing the whole story?
Can I take that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
I think it's not. From my experience, if you're proposing something which is really the beginnings of a program, it's unlikely that you will complete the story. So I don't think that should be a restriction in your putting together the program, but it should have some endpoints so that at the end of the program you do have something to show. Again, I want to add experience of mine that the program that we started 25 years ago still continues because we are working on some of the programs that we had, I mean, maybe with different people, but it still continues in concept. And, so the story is not complete 25 years later, but still, it began with an HFSP idea. Yeah, so I hope that helps people take, take their at least their, truly ambitious ideas and bring them out.
Chantal, I could just amplify what Jeetu just said. This question essentially captures the essential of what an HFSP grant is supposed to be from our point of view. It is meant as a seed grant to start something new. Think of it simply as a joint venture. You get together and you put your ideas together and you work on that jointly. And Jeetu put it rightly. It can last, but it should have some. Our grant has a fixed ending date, so you may want to make sure you have something in your hand by the time your grant ends, which is nice for us as a funder, but it really is meant as a seed grant to get you started. And I remember, Rajna, your talk at our meeting last year in Tokyo, you really made that point where you guys got together and tried something new. So really, that is the essence of an HFSP grant.
Yeah, absolutely, Guntram. There's no way, it can be a complete story if you're doing something brand new. And someday, as Jeetu was saying, he's been doing this for 25 years, and now we started something new, and now we have more students and postdocs in the lab continuing to work on that, maybe writing more grant applications, because same team won't just stop working because our HFSP grant ran out, and we will not be funded by HFSP again on the same thing, but we'll continue our story.
Yeah. Good question. Yeah.
Thank you. So Rashna, next is a question maybe we could have you address. So this is about when to apply for an HFSP research grant. So the question has come from an anonymous attendee. Can the HFSP grant be the first grant the PI is applying for, or does the committee consider the previous number or amounts of grants? So what was your experience?
Maybe you would also have to have another member answer this, but
Definitely.
from my perspective, it wasn't our first grant because we don't, and the team didn't qualify for an early career grant. Our composition was such, and and the fact that one of our co-PIs is in his 70s means there's no sort of lower or upper age limit in terms of experience for a program grant. What I think worked in our favor was that all of us were established in what we were doing. So even though, you don't have preliminary data, we made a convincing argument that we can actually do what it is that we're setting out to do. At least, some of it definitely was doable, and we had to make the case for that. And I think Almut or somebody would be able to answer for an early career investigator and how those grants work.
Well, within 5 years of your first independent position. So you have to have an independent position. You can't apply when you're a postdoc in someone else's lab. But then it can be your first grant if you're extremely lucky and put very challenging questions. I don't think there's no formal requirement. If you have shown in your PhD and postdoc time that you've been able to do a lot of work efficiently and you answer the questions, people don't look at quantity so much as at quality of the work you've done.
But
Thank
for the
you.
early career, all team members need to be in an early stage of their career, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. Actually, that was another question that had come in regarding the constitution of the early career grant. So we have covered that as well. So again, I'd like to point out that if any of you want to join, you can raise your hands and we'll get to you. We're just going through the questions that have come in the Q&A box. So another question that's come in is about the team composition. So I'm going to kind of tag two questions together here. The first question is from Meghna Krishnadas. And she asks, can we have theoreticians or modelers from different, can we have theoretician or modelers from the same broad field, but bringing in very different expertise? Example, mathematical modeling. Or does interdisciplinary mean that the team member has to be from a different domain from life science?
No, I think that would count. I mean, maybe I can take that. That would
Go
certainly
ahead, Gautam.
That would certainly count. It would be it's a different type of expertise, but it related to the same field. So that would certainly count. That wouldn't be a problem.
Does anybody want to add on to that? Or okay, so in that case, I'll ask another kind of allied question that's come in, and that is regarding whether you can combine fields such as humanities when you are kind of designing your proposal. Can you have someone from a humanities field as well? Maybe we could have Almut or Guntram.
Yeah, you can, but you still have to ask a life science question. We're having those occasionally. I can't tell you how successful they are on the average, but if a life science researcher adds to the competence needed to ask this life science question, that's fantastic. It's not, you can't apply for cultural projects as such, but the competence may be needed.
I think that was what the person was alluding to, have somebody with expertise from a humanities project joining a life science project. Okay, so
for example, Shantala, we had a proposal from our institute funded with an architect and somebody who's interested in ant colonies and
termites.
So yeah, so there was a full-fledged architect and his firm who joined the proposal. So that's so it's very, very broad in terms of the spectrum. Okay, I have to say goodbye, but I'm just going to step out because I've joined another meeting. It was very nice to be part of this panel. So bye-bye.
Thank you so much for joining us and for your presentation. So I'll go ahead with the next question. So the next question is, again, a little about building a strong application. This comes in from Nitin Mohan. How much weightage is given to credentials? Example, publication records of the scientists participating in the proposed project. So could we have?
I just answered this in writing in the chat also.
Okay.
Shantala, if you want to show that.
Perfect. Okay, so I'll get back to that. I just had to find that answer. So I'll come back to it. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so the answer is the credentials are not taken into account in the HFSP peer review. So it's basically the more emphasis is on the scientific quality and the excellence of the science that's being proposed in this award. Correct me if I didn't paraphrase that well, Guntram.
No, that's correct. It's just there's these urban legends floating around still, unfortunately, and I think Gautam may amplify that. I mean, HFSP research proposals are looked at from a purely scientific angle. There are certain criteria, the interdisciplinarity and so on, but then it's the scientific excellence and whether that meets or fits within the scientific realm of HFSP, and this is what we're looking at, not at the credential of a scientist. Regularly, Nobel laureates go home with bloody noses, so this is not this is not something we consider as part of our peer review assessment.
If I could just add to that, I mean, that's completely true that the credential doesn't matter, but you do have to convince the committee that you can do it.
Sure.
In that sense, that your record of publications, what you do, is relevant to whether your application is taken seriously or not.
Thank you. So another point that I think we can touch about is an anonymous attendee has written in. Can you clarify the point about the project being such that it can't be funded by other agencies? I'm guessing they mean other national agencies. Because if a project is feasible, why would a different agency not fund it? So maybe I can
weigh in from the Indian funding perspective, and then the others can weigh in as well from the HFSP perspective. So I've also reviewed, several grants for the DBT or SERB, and we're looking for slightly different things there, especially from a mid-career perspective. Preliminary data is important. You have to be able to prove that you're capable of doing this. The expected outcome, the committee needs to be convinced that this is not just something original, but something very doable. Whereas my sense is that something completely out there, people may think about whether it's fundable or not. Whereas the opposite is true for HFSP. So I have to admit here that, I had people read the application, at least the letter of intent, and people who have experience in knowing what HFSP wants. And some of the things that we had written there, because both, Paul, who writes NIH grants regularly, and myself from the DBT SERB perspective, had written that we want to study polyphosphates because it's involved in blood clotting, and then there will be an importance of, from a human health perspective. You've got to write all of that in, and you've got to show it's important for a regular national grant. Whereas all that was actually scratched out of our letter of intent because it wasn't necessary. In fact, it should be the opposite. So I would say that's one difference.
I think I can emphasize that, Shantala. If you start your grant proposal specifically at the letter of intent stage with telling us how important it is for human health and the environment, it's not necessarily positive. It doesn't hurt if your idea will lead to translational or applied science, but that should not be your motivation in doing that particular project. You really should be interested in answering a very fundamental question, a basic question. You have the freedom to really ask these questions without having to think whether it will be useful or not. And don't use your little space in the application form, especially in the letter of intent, with telling people how useful things will be. Just tell them how you will answer that question.
Mm-hmm. So I think with this, we're done. We're also kind of we have crossed our time limit by a few minutes. So I'm just going to check once more if there's any other question. So maybe very briefly, someone's asking, can we choose collaborators from an institute we have previously worked in, such as their postdoc? And I think this was covered, but we could briefly get to this. Guntram, Almut, would you? I saw Almut shaking her head.
Yes, you can do that. There's no formal limit, but it's not going to give you a higher chance, because if it's your good old friend from postdoc times, people will see it, and reviewers make comments like they've been postdocs at the same institute together, so it's not the best way to get a grant. Try to find new people who you can exchange ideas with, new people who have a different background, because that gives you new solutions. If you talk to people you've been talking to in your past, you will get fewer new ideas to solve those problems. So reach out to new people, and it's easier than you think.
Thanks, Almut. Would anybody else? Yes.
Maybe just in general, to encourage the participants, even if we cannot treat now all questions just write to us. It's
Yes.
always good to write to your funder and get a written answer back, rather than
Exactly.
submitting a proposal where you don't know if it fits. Write to us, right? Almut has presented you the grant email. You can write to communications or info. Better to write to us. And if I receive a message, then I contact Almut to answer if that is appropriate, or my colleague in the fellowship department. Always write to your funder to get a written answer back. Team composition, topic, whatever. Encourage you to write to us if you want to.
So that's very refreshing from an Indian perspective, right? To the funder and get an answer.
And get an
Well,
answer.
that's the idea of HFSP.
Exactly.
Wonderful. So thank you. I think with that, we have covered most of the questions. If at all we have any more questions, we will share it with the panelists. If we feel there are any questions that we couldn't cover, we will share it with the panelists, and then the answers will be put along with the video, which we will upload to our YouTube channel. So I want to say a huge thank you to everyone, to all our speakers for today's session. It's been really nice that we could have such a kind of breadth to the kind of understanding the HFSP research grants, because there is some amount of kind of mystery or kind of like, uncertainty in India regarding the HFSP research grants. So I really hope that this session helped clear that. It helps people to at least get started on the journey, which, as Rashna, Jeetu, and the rest of you have said, does lead you on kind of almost a lifelong journey of the kind of scientific pursuit that you can undertake. So a big thank you. Thank you so much, Almut. Thank you, Guntram. Thank you, Rashna. Thank you, Gautam. And Jeetu is not here, but a big thank you to him as well. And thank you to everybody who helped at the back end. So Shreya, Manjula, Bhavna. So if you have any further questions, you can email either the speakers directly at HFSP or Rashna or Gautam, or you can email IndiaBioscience iGAP at indiabioscience.org. We will help send these messages forward. If you have any other international funding opportunities that you want information on, you can let us know, because we're in the process of kind of creating these resources for a wide variety of funding opportunities. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
So thank you all. Have a good evening, or I guess early afternoon, depending on which time zone you're joining us from.
Okay.
So thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Shantala, for
Bye.
making this happen.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Shantala.
Thanks,
Great
Shantala.
effort.
Thanks,
Excellent.
Bhavna, Shreya. Thank you.
Thank you.